GPO account policy and audit policy. In this nugget, we'll be talking about group policy object account policy and audit policy, among other things, such as WMI filters. I would have talked about WMI filters in the last nugget, it's just that I didn't want it to run too long, and this is a good place to insert it. This is a way that we can control a more narrow focus of where our policies actually apply, based upon things such as various criteria like hardware, software, BIOS, and the like. And then we'll also take a look here at enabling user objects. Now that's a very poorly worded exam objective because there's nothing in group policy that is worded this way. What this is really doing is you can enable or disable the user or computer side of a policy. And I'll show you that. And that's what that really should be referring to. And then we'll take a look at starter GPOs, which are kind of like starting points for GPOs so that you can have some pre-configured settings available. We look at audit policy as well, which we've already looked at in previous nuggets, but this again is simply a way you can identify when a change has been made to something or when something's been accessed, for example. We look at user rights as well so that people can do things that are beyond the scope of their normal user privileges, and you can add incrementally just individual single items for a specific user or a group. Then we're going to take a look at security options here as well. There are various ones that are available for you there. And password policy, so that you can know where to set up the password complexity and the password length and the like. Also, the account lockout is closely related to the password policy, because if they enter in the wrong password, there will be an account lockout policy configured for that, as well as security templates that you can configure to configure a great deal of these particular security settings. And then we take a look at restricted groups, which is one of my favorite settings within a GPOs. Now first, let's take a look at something called WMI filters. A WMI filter means Windows Management Instrumentation, and it can query a system on virtually any aspect of it, such as its operating system, installed software, what kind of hardware is installed in that system, what kind of BIOS is there, the processor, the amount of available memory, all kinds of things. For example, you could use a WMI query to install software using group policy only on systems that had enough memory to actually support that software. So for example, if I was going to install Photoshop or some big application that required lots of memory, I would say only install if the WMI query evaluates to true and that the statement would be at least 2 gigabytes of RAM, let's say. Okay, or I could say only turn on a policy if the operating system is Windows Vista or Windows Server 2008 or whatever. So for example, here I really like my quick launch little buttons down here. I use those things all the time. You don't really see me use them very much while I'm recording, but I do. I use it to launch VMware and all kinds of other stuff. So I like that. But perhaps for our domain, we've decided to make it a policy not to put those down there. Maybe it confuses the users or something like that. So we decided to get rid of that for everybody else, but we only want to apply it to our servers. So here what I've done is I've turned off, or is it remove, quick launch right here. Okay, let me show you what that policy looks like as I edit this, and I go down to the policies, administrative templates, and then down to the start menu and taskbar, and it says, you would think that it would say remove quick launch from the start menu, so you go look here in the remove, but guess what? Microsoft decided to change it up for that one setting, and they have show quick launch on the taskbar, and now you have to disable it. So it's just a little bit of a different verbiage there. You do have to read carefully some of this stuff sometimes. And by the way, if you're having trouble finding something in one of these templates, for these administrative templates, they are searchable by filter. So I could right-click on this, choose filter on, and then I could filter against filter options. So I could select that, and I could just search for the word quick launch. Or how about taskbar? Let's just do that one, be a little bit more general. And you can see that I can search for any of those items. And then I click on OK, and now it's going to show me any settings in each one of these little nodes that relates directly to taskbar. Okay, so each one of those things would then appear. The desktop, those things appear on the taskbar. Oh, by the way, let me go back to this one. What's going on here is anytime the word taskbar appears anywhere in the policy itself, such as this one where it says taskbar, or if it's even in the description. So if I go to display, look, oh, wait a minute, that didn't look like it says taskbar, but let's double click on it, look at the explain tab, which by the way is really good on-the-spot help for these different items. Look, it does use the word taskbar in that little explain text, so that's why it appears. If you don't really care what node it is, you just want to see all the settings, just click all settings, and this will show you then everything where taskbar would appear. So that's how you can use the filters for that. And then if you go back to the filter options, you can specify whether you want to narrow that down, you can say, I really don't care about the explain text. I just want to know the policy title, for example. You can also put comments in your policies using the comment tab, and then you just type in whatever you want, and then you can search against that item as well. Very useful if you can say, in the comment, this policy was created by James Conrad, and then someone else in my organization could look for any comments that had the name James Conrad in them, for example. And then up here at the top it says managed, yes or no, or any. What this relates to is certain kinds of policies are kind of designed for group policy, and other kinds are really things that you can custom configure by custom templates and custom registry settings. We'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later on, and that would relate to ADM or ADMX templates, and then you can say whether or not they are configured. So I want to only see things that are configured. Okay, and this might help to narrow it down as well. You can say, man, someone set up a policy in there, but I click on through it and I can't find it. And by the way, there's about 3,000 policy settings, so you might need to use this just to find something. Okay, all right, so we'll go with that setting. And now I've changed my filter criteria to only thing that's configured. I can also do requirements filters like this, and I can say only things that relate to Internet Explorer 7 or a specific operating system or anything else like that I want to, but I'm okay with our settings for now. And once I've done that, it will show me that only one setting is actually configured that shows the word taskbar in it. So, quick little side note there, but something that's very handy and useful to know. And if you don't want to use the filter anymore, just click back to the filter on item. It will then go back to the default view. And this is something that we call, this whole thing that I just showed you is in the exam objectives, and it's called group policy filtering. That's what that's all about. Okay, so I've created this policy, and we can see that it's going to, of course, apply to all users, authenticated users, but it's going to be a little bit too broad if I take it up here and drop it on the domain. Okay, because now it's going to apply to this server here as well. So let's go ahead and do a GP update. And we'll see that in just a moment, that quick launch will go away, or it will prevent me, there it goes, it will prevent me from being able to reconfigure that in any way. So if I go back to the properties and say, wait a minute, I want the quick launch, oops, not there. Now what? Well, that's because the policy applied, and now I don't have it. So a way that I can work with that is to go back up here where I've removed the quick launch item, go to WMI filtering, and you can see that I've already configured a Vista only item there. Well, first of all, how did I do that? You have to, the only reason why this appears is because I've already configured it as a WMI filter down here. Now, I don't think you need to memorize how to construct your own WMI filter. You're just going to need to know that you can use it to be very discriminate in how policies apply. Now, here's what my policy, my filter looked like. I'll right-click on this and choose Edit. And I'll choose Edit again. And this is just what I put in. Select star from Win32 operating system, where name is like Vista. So it doesn't have to have the full name, because sometimes it'll say Vista Business Edition or Enterprise or, Ultimate, something like that. I just want anything that has the word Vista in it. So if it evaluates to the operating system having something like the word Vista in it, then what's going to happen is it will apply that policy. So up here on the quick launch item, I say I only want that to apply to Vista systems. And are you sure you want to do that? Yes. Now when I do a GP update, oops, it helps if you spell it right, doesn't it? Let me try that again. GP update. Once I do that, now it will not bring back immediately my quick launch area, but what it will do is allow me to reconfigure it again. So I'll right click here and choose the properties, and now we'll see that quick launch comes back. So now I got my quick launch back there, and I can fiddle around with that as necessary. So, very handy item. You can use WMI filters, which you configure down here. And you saw how I configured that one. And then what I do is I go to a policy where I want to apply that WMI filter, and I select it from the drop-down. And anything I've configured here, WMI filters, will now appear right there. Oh, and I guess I better show you that that does apply to a Vista machine. Okay, so remember, remove the quick launch, doesn't apply here because I'm not a Vista machine, so I am able to receive my quick launch. But over here on this Vista Client 01, where I'm also logged on as the trainer account, look, no quick launch area. If I go to the properties of the taskbar, again, I cannot select it. Why is all of that? Only because of the fact that I've got this WMI filter. Now, as a quick troubleshooting item, too, let me point something out here for you. If you're not quite sure that maybe your WMI filter is causing a problem or this policy in itself is causing an issue, what you can do is to go down to the policy. Where is it? Right here. You go down to the policy, and I can go over to the details right here, and I can take a look at this GPO status. Notice that its setting is enabled. Now, where does the policy for quick launch appear? That was a user configuration setting, wasn't it? So, what I could do is I could say user configuration settings disabled. And I could just disable that one half of it if I want to. And that is something else that you need to know about for the exam objectives. I do think that it is very poorly worded in the exam objectives. They state it as enabling user objects. This is really not the correct verbiage for that, because that sounds a lot like enabling or disabling user accounts, which you don't do using group policy. But what they're saying is user configuration settings right here, where I can disable just the user configuration settings or the computer configuration settings, because otherwise there's no other such verbiage in all of group policy that just says enabling user objects. So just be aware of the two sides of things. Now, I do recommend that you create and you configure one setting in that policy for most purposes. However, you might have some people that decide, you know what, they want to create the mother of all policies, and it has a whole bunch of computer side settings, has a bunch of user side settings in it. Well, if it causes a problem and I have to troubleshoot it, maybe I suspect there's a problem with the user configuration settings. Well, if I disable just the user side settings now, guess what? I'm not only disabling that one setting that might be causing me a problem, I'm also disabling, the other 24 settings that are on the user side, and I could really open up Pandora's box and expose my users to interface items they're not supposed to see and all that kind of stuff. So that's, again, another reason why I like to keep one policy with one setting, and if I have other settings I want to configure, just create another policy. And then in like fashion, by the way, not only can I just disable the user configuration settings, but I can also disable the computer configuration settings like this, or I could disable all settings, as you can see there, or I can go back to the default enabled setting like we see here. Next, let's talk about starter GPOs. This is especially useful for larger organizations with multiple IT staff persons that would be responsible for creating their own GPOs. Wouldn't it be nice if I had a lot of common settings that we needed in just about every department, and anytime a department IT person was to create a policy, they could right-click and create a new group policy object, and they would just choose new, and wouldn't it be nice if they had a starter GPO down here that had already gotten for them a bunch of pre-configured settings so that they didn't have to reconfigure the wheel or recreate the wheel every time? Well, that would be great. So we can do that here by right-clicking on Starter GPOs and choosing New. And then I can set in there my most commonly used company settings. Now, whoever creates their policy based on a Starter GPO, they can change it if they want. These are just kind of serving suggestions, so to speak. So I'll just say Company User Settings. Okay, something like that. And then once I get into this, I can actually edit what the company user settings are. Notice that we don't have software installation settings or Windows configuration in any of this. It's only administrative templates. That's the only thing that we do with these items. But let me just configure a few simple items here just so we have something to work with. And I'll alphabetize this list. And really, I'm just going to enable the first three settings, whatever they are, just so that we have, so that we can demonstrate that these things actually work when you create your own policy. Okay, so I've got 3 enabled settings right there at the top as I alphabetized that item. Okay, now what I want to do here is maybe I'm an administrator from an OU and I'm in charge of a specific OU, and I know I need to have those same 3 settings to get started, but boy, I don't want to have to recreate the wheel. So I'll choose a new policy here, and I'll say My OU Settings. But I already happen to know, because I just read the email last night, that somebody has set up a starter GPO that's got all the settings I need to get started with. Wow, that's going to be a time saver. So I'll use these company user settings. And then, now when I go to my OU settings and I choose to edit this, look what it's going to have for me. Underneath my policies for administrative templates and start menu and taskbar, look, when I alphabetize this, it's already got these 3 settings configured for me, and I didn't even have to touch them. Now, if I just change my mind, I say, oh, wait a minute, in our department and in my OU, we do have to have this thing not configured. So I'll set it at not configured instead and click OK. Pretty well done. And that way I can custom configure. I can start with the starter GPO settings, but then I can still continue to custom configure it for my own purposes. I want to talk to you about some other policy items as well. These are just various settings that you just need to know of in kind of a general sense. You need to be able to locate where they are and a general understanding for what their purpose is. I'm just going to create a new policy here. And by the way, in production, I most often will do this as well. This will be a policy that will never be linked anywhere, and I'll just name it accordingly. And I'll just call it, unlinked policy do not use. Okay, something like that. The reason why I create this policy is because most administrators will need to dink around and kind of just dig around into various policies to say, now where was that setting, and then they'll look at the different things, and we wouldn't want to accidentally enable a policy that could cause us problems. So if I have any exploring that I want to do or anything like that, I'll always edit this unlinked policy, just kind of dig around and try to find what it is that I'm looking for. But one of the things we'll take a look at here, for example, is under Policies, Windows Settings, and Security Settings. I would be aware of the Security Settings items. And we've already addressed some of these in previous nuggets, especially things like the password and stuff like that. But we'll also take a look here at some other items that might be specific to the exam. In fact, they're even listed explicitly as user rights. So for in this case, the user rights is one thing that you do want to be aware of. Now, this does not mean that you need to be able to memorize every one of these. Again, there's over 3,000 policies. Microsoft doesn't expect you to have a photographic memory for that type of thing. But do go through this and kind of peruse it and identify some of the common kinds of things, or rather some of the things that do appear. What kinds of things would appear here? For example, I would have someone that has the user right to change the system time. Normally, we don't want users to do that because it could totally mess up Kerberos. And if the time skew is too different, your user accounts won't be able to log on, and your computer accounts won't be able to log on. But there might be a specific user in a particular division that I want to be able to change the system time for whatever purpose. I would simply double-click on this one, define the policy settings, add that user account or that group that they belong to, either one, and then they'd be able to change the system time even though they were just a generic domain user and not of high-level administrative privilege. So I could override their normal default user rights by configuring this item. Let me think of another one here that you might be interested in. How about force shutdown from a remote system? What you can do is you can shut down a remote computer. If you go to a command prompt, for example, then I could type something like this in, shutdown /M, which means that I want to point to a specific computer, and then /S would be shut down. I could have also done /R for restart, for example. /T for the amount of time, and then 0. That means to shut that machine down immediately. And if I were to press enter now and I had the appropriate permissions, which would be the case if I were an administrator or if I'd been granted permission like this, then I would be able to shut a remote machine down. And again, the user rights here are useful to be able to append or change whatever a user's default rights already are. So if I had a specific user in one of my other offices that I wanted to have them be able to remotely shut down a server, for example, because maybe it needs to be rebooted or something like that, then I would grant them the permissions within this policy, and again, I would define the policy setting, add their user or group account, and that would be that. And then among these settings, the other one that really jumps out to me that I think might be useful for you would be this one as well. Allow logon locally. Now, normally, users can log on to just about any computer in the domain. One thing that they cannot log on to, though, would be a domain controller. And you wouldn't want that, of course. You wouldn't want generic users, if they had physical access to your domain controllers, to be able to log on to them. So what you could do is, if you had someone in a remote office that you needed to be able to log on locally because they didn't have their own IT staff, for example, I could, again, define the policy setting, add that user or group to this particular policy, and then have them log on to help us troubleshoot it over the phone or do something like that. Likewise, you might need to know about security options. This, again, is another stated exam objective, just the security options item that appears here. Again, I don't think you're going to have to memorize every single one of these items. It's quite a lot to look at there. But you just need to know what kinds of things you can use for this type of thing. So again, I would peruse through this, and I would just kind of keep looking through them and just look through them. I would read each one, and then just kind of, get an idea for the types of things that are there. I'll tell you this, after having a lot of experience with policy, most of the time you could probably name any setting Like, James, where would you go ahead and, do this or that? And I might not get it right away, but I can click around, and within just a few moments, I can usually find just about anything. And that's the level of expertise that you probably need to have to some degree to be able to work with this kind of thing. So if someone mentioned something relating to a security setting, well, you'd say, that sounds a lot like security options. I'll bet it's in here somewhere, and if I just alphabetize this, I'll bet I can find what I'm looking for. So there's a couple of key settings here, for example, that you might want to be aware of. Like this one right here, do not display last username. So if you enable this policy setting, and I clicked OK, then what that would do is just what it sounds like. When you log on to your computer, then it won't show you the name of the last person that logged on, and that's what it usually does as a matter of convenience, so that users don't have to type in both their username and password. Usually they just type in their password. There are other things here as well, and you can see again that there's quite a few. You could do message text and title for users attempting to log on. Very often, if you have a legal disclaimer that you want people to be aware of before they log on, then you can use this message text, and it will say something to the effect of, by logging onto this computer, you agree to company policy to acceptable use of the internet, and so on and so forth. And violation of these policies is punishable by death, or words to that effect. So again, these security options are other things that you just need to be aware of, and I would kind of go through them and familiarize yourself with them, but don't memorize them. Now, I also want to point out the password policy that appears under account policies here. You should be, again, somewhat familiar with these account policies and these items down here. We've looked at these a few times in the past over the course of this video series, all these nuggets that we've taken a look at. So you're probably already familiar with these, but just as a quick review, we can enforce the password history so that you have to change your password 24 different times before it can, before an original password can be reused. You have a maximum password age of 42 days, or you can change that. You can change any of these things, but that's the default anyway. So within 42 days, I have to reset my password to something else. My password has to be at least 30 days, and that would prevent us from changing our password 24 different times right immediately in succession, so I can get back to my favorite password, for example. Then I have a minimum password length of at least 7 characters, and I have to meet complexity requirements, which is that thing where you have to have, upper, lowercase, numbers, special characters, that sort of thing in your password. And all these things are, by default, are configured in the default domain policy. So they're already configured by these settings there. You can change the default domain policy if you want, or you can create a separate policy instead if you don't want to touch the default domain policy. That's actually what I recommend. And then you can just put it in the proper order. Let me explain what I mean by that. Now let's say that here on the domain, let's say we already have a few policies set up, but let's say that within this policy here, whatever that one was. Let's say that I also had my my domain password policy configured in that. Well, the fact of the matter is, whatever is at the top of the link order, like in the position number 1, that would take precedence. So if there's a conflict between the passwords that I configured here and the passwords configured here, this one will win because it's at the top of the link order. If I were to say, you know what, that's not what I want, then I'll just change it by clicking move this link up, or I can click the double arrows to go move it all the way to the top. And then now this one takes precedence, and if it has password settings in it, then that's the one that's going to get, the trump card, so to speak. And then in similar fashion, you need to know about the account lockout policy as well. So if someone's trying to log in and they're doing a brute force attack, I don't want them to be able to make thousands of different logon attempts per minute and eventually guess a password. So I could do an account lockout threshold of, and very common one is going to be 3 invalid logon attempts. I think that's a little bit restrictive. I usually make it 5 or more, but we can make it 5. And then once we do that, notice that it also prompts me that I'll have to make an account lockout duration. These are dependents. These depend upon each other, so I have to make that by default at least 30 minutes, and reset the account lockout counter after 30 minutes as well. And again, we've looked at these in the past as well, but just by way of review, these are the settings that we can have. And then finally, remember the Kerberos policy, the main one here that's going to be important to us, and this one's already going to be configured by default on the default domain policy, and that is the one that says maximum tolerance for computer clock synchronization. That's set by 5 minutes by default on the default domain policy. I would also be aware of the fact that it's possible to have custom created security settings by way of template. You see, I've gone through here and I've clicked on different settings and I've kind of change settings like that just manually. There are other tools that can be used. Just be aware that it's possible, and that can create custom INF files for you that have all of that configured in that plain text INF file. Then once that file is configured, you can import it on the security settings by right-clicking, choosing Import Policy, and browsing for that INF template. Okay, so just be aware of the fact that it certainly is possible to do things that way as well. And very often these could come from other parts of your organization or from high-level administrators that are responsible for administering security, and they will require that you have a certain level of security set on a given location, and then you would be required to import that template that they have pre-configured for you. Also, the NSA has given security templates as well. A lot of government organizations out there have free for your own use if you want to borrow them. You can download INF templates for them, for their security templates, and then import them and use them within your own company as well. Be very careful though, because you can lock yourself out of stuff, and it's very difficult to get unlocked out, because a lot of those templates are extremely complex and difficult. Let's also briefly revisit another local policy. Let me skip back down here, and that was the audit policy. Remember that you can audit a lot of these different kinds of things that you see here, and most of these pretty well explain themselves, but as a quick review, you can audit account logon events. And these would be things that your domain controller can track. So if I audit account logon events, then these would be anything that my domain controller has logged on users for. Or account management. If I decided to change somebody's group membership, for example, I might want to see who's changing these group memberships, who's making changes to users' passwords and things. So anytime someone touches an account, then I can figure that out as well, and an event will be logged in the event log on my domain controller. Audit directory service access. See anybody who's accessing the directory service or Active Directory. Audit logon events. Now, what's the difference between that one and this one? They seem kind of similar. The logon events would be something that would happen on, for example, the actual computer that's being logged onto. So Active Directory domain controllers will authenticate me. But my Vista workstation, where I actually physically log on, that's what's going to register the account, the logon event that I see right here. That's the difference. This is domain controller. This is the local workstation or server that the user is physically logging onto. This is an important one. Audit object access. Remember, we did this a little while ago in a previous nugget, but I can audit whoever's accessing a file, for example. If they open up that file, or if they read that file, if they modify that file, all I have to do is to audit that object's access. The same thing can happen for parts of the registry, and you can also audit printers. Okay, so that's what objects would include: files, registry, printers. The audit policy change. Anytime someone changes the group policy object, for example, anytime someone uses their privilege. So, for example, maybe they have backup operator privileges because they're a member of the backup operators group. Anytime they use that special privilege as a backup operator to backup or restore something, we can log that as well. We can also audit process tracking, which is something that's a little bit more programmatic in nature if we want to see how programs are working. And then we can also audit system events. And these would be things that relate to the operating system, like, if somebody changes the size of the paging file, that would be a system event that we could then audit as well. Now let me also talk to you here about something called restricted groups. This is actually one of my favorite things, and I think it's very, very useful, so I'm going to actually go into a little bit more detail here, where I've logged onto my Vista client as the trainer account, which is an administrative level account. I'm going to right-click to choose Manage on the computer so we can open up the Computer Management Console. Having access to the Computer Management Console, as we look at the local users and groups here, we'll see that the group's administrators has as its default membership actually the trainer account, which is a local trainer account that was created when this computer was first installed. Then there's the domain admins. That's the default membership right there. And the local administrator account is also a member of the local administrators. So, for example, anytime that I log on as a member of domain admins, I have total control over this computer because of my membership in the administrators security group. Okay. Now, what I could do is, I could have thousands of computers, and I really want the help desk to be a member here as well. So I could log on to all those thousands of computers, manually click on add, manually type in help desk, check the names, click OK, and so forth until I finally get all that membership added in. Of course, you could also do something like that with scripting and the like. But I think that there's a better way to do that because it's already built into group policy. Let's take a look at what we could do. Here, first of all, I want to go ahead and create, let me go back in here, let me go ahead and create a security group. So I'll go up to Roles, Active Directory users and computers, and I'll just drill on down through here. Let's work with my Phoenix users. Maybe I have a help desk here, so I'll choose a new group. There we go. I'll call this PHX help desk. Okay, and I've got let's just put a few user accounts in there. Okay, so I've got my Phoenix help desk members, add Phoenix users, and I'll put in these 3 users. Okay. All right, so there it is. I got some, Phoenix Help Desk folks in there. Now, how am I going to make sure that this security group is a member of all of the computers' administrator security group? Well, what I can do is to go back down to my policy, and here I'm just going to close this kind of sample one that I was working with earlier, and I'm going to branch out to Phoenix computer users, and this is the particular organizational unit for all the Phoenix computers that want to make sure that it has the appropriate group membership in the local administrators. Let me just, by the way, delete some of these old ones that we aren't using anymore, just so that we don't have any confusion with different things. And I'll right-click to create a GPO in this domain and link it here, and I'm going to say add Phoenix Help Desk to local admins. Okay. My policies under computer configuration, Windows settings, security settings, and then restricted groups. Now, here's what I'll do. I'll right-click here to choose Add Group. And then the temptation is to click on Browse, of course. And I'll say, who do I want to add to? Well, administrators. Okay. And we'd click OK, and then you'd be tempted to click OK, and that would be that. Then you would add in whoever you wanted to. Let me point something out here. I did this exactly the wrong way just now. But the reason why I did it the wrong way is because everybody does it this way, and you would also probably do it this way because it's human nature. Well, there's a Browse button. Why not use it, right? Don't do that, however. What this would do is it would add membership to the administrators group in the domain administrators group, not domain admins, but the administrators group on this domain controller. Ouch. I wouldn't want to do that. I don't want to add my help desk to the administrators security group on domain controllers. So what you'll do instead is start over, right-click, choose Add Group, and then you have to do this. I don't understand why Microsoft made it so counterintuitive. You have to type the word administrators. Okay? There's no visual difference between browsing and typing, but the reality is you must type it. Okay? Trust me on this. Then I'll click on Add, and I'll enter in the members of the group. Now you can click Browse if you want, because I'm actually looking for a domain account, and that was Phoenix Help Desk or something like that. There it is. Okay, okay, done. Okay? Easy as can be. Now what I'll do here is I'll just go here, and I'm going to GP update this real quick. Update. Okay? And this should happen on the fly and while I'm even seated at the computer. So we should see the group membership change right away. Remember, before it was, what was it, trainers, and then domain admins, and then the local administrator account was a member of that security group, of the local administrators here. Now we're going to see a change here, which is, by the way, going to be both good and bad. Now, here's the good. You can't ever get rid of the administrator. Okay, that's kind of hard-coded into the operating system. You can never remove that one. That's fine. And look, there's the good news. There's my Phoenix Help Desk. Do you notice anything wrong with this picture, though? Guess what happened? Where's my domain admins? Ouch. I just deprivileged all of my domain admins from the entire domain and all of the workstations. That could really hurt. I mean, you might have to write a new resume for doing this. So this is something you have to watch out for very carefully. This is an explicit tool. So when I go back into its properties, I have to explicitly add in who I want. Okay, so again, I can browse for this one again, so I'll just browse. Domain admins, and like that. Okay, now once I refresh this policy, GP updated again, then it's going to have the correct membership, but you just have to make sure that you explicitly add in there whoever you want. But otherwise, wow, this is a very powerful tool. Hopefully we have the right membership now. Yes, there we go. So now we've got who we wanted because we explicitly added them in. So really good tool there by using restricted groups. And you can either do a lot of damage very quickly, or you can do it right very quickly. Just do it very right, the way I showed you. In this nugget, we talked about group policy object account policy and audit policy, as well as WMI filters, which, remember, that's how we can narrow the focus even more as to what the policy applies to and which computers it applies to. So, for example, it could apply to a computer with a certain operating system, as we saw in our demo. And then we also took a look at enabling user objects. Now, that's a poorly stated exam objective, because, again, there's nothing in group policy object land that says enabling user objects. What they're really discussing there is the fact that you can disable the user or computer side of things in a policy. And remember, you do that through the Settings tab. And then there's the starter GPOs, which are ways of getting pre-configured settings already configured for you, so you don't have to recreate the wheel every time you need those settings. And then there's the audit policy, which is very useful in identifying if something's been changed or modified, or if someone has, logged on or something like that. Then we looked at user rights as well, which gives people incrementally a little bit more privilege than their account might otherwise have, or you could also restrict something, but very often we use it to expand somebody's right so that we don't have to add them to a higher level administrative group, but at the same time we give them a level of privilege that they need. Then there's also security options, and we took a look at quite a few of those, and then also password policy. Remember, this is where we configure things such as the password length and complexity. If people enter in the wrong password a few times, they could get locked out, which is where we looked at the account lockout settings. And a lot of these settings can all be configured or pre-configured in something called a security template, which you can download from various locations or custom create on your own. But the security templates are actually INF files that you can then apply. And then there's the restricted groups. That's one of my favorite settings, and that's how I can configure the group membership of a local computer by using a password policy, rather not a password policy, a restricted groups policy. And with that little blunder, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.